Good morning, everyone, and thank you for spending some time here with us today. Cadets at the United States Military Academy began the practice of wearing class rings nearly 180 years ago, serving as a symbol of graduation from the greatest leadership institution in the world. Today, thanks to the thoughtfulness and generosity of John Stuart Slack III, one of those rings is coming home. It's the ring that was presented to Glenn Davis, 1946 Heisman Trophy winner, three-time national champion, and arguably the greatest all-around athlete West Point has ever seen. We like to say that every cadet and every graduate of West Point can tell a unique story, and each class ring has a unique story as well. And this is a story of inspiration and encouragement. At this time, I'd like to welcome Mr. John Stuart Slack III to the podium.
Thank you very much. I did not have any, or I do not have any of his DNA, but I did, something did come down from him. He did not enjoy public speaking. I want to impress on y'all that the first thing, Glenn was a real gentleman. I lived with him from the time I was 9 till the time I was 18 and went off to college. And I do not ever remember him swearing or using a curse word at home. And I verified that with my brother, who was born when I was 13, last week. He was a real gentleman. He was also really generous. I was out visiting at my parents' desert home, and he was sitting at the coffee table, and he had a bunch of manila envelopes. And I said, "Mom, what is Glenn doing?" She said, "He's autographing magazines from the 40s. I said, "Where do you get them?" She said, "People send them to him, and he just autographs them and sends them back." My brother said, "Yeah, and if they don't send return postage, he pays for it himself." And my brother said, "Dad, don't you know those people are selling it for a profit?" He said, "Well, that's up to them." He was just really generous. Glenn had two expletives. Instead of cursing, I will use his emphasis, he would say, "cheese and crackers." And when someone would miss a block or a tackle, he'd say, "Jiminy Christmas, did you see that guy miss that? He needs to go back to the basics." He was, and humble. My wife and I met my parents in New Orleans at Galatoire's restaurant about 1990. And at that time, you couldn't make reservations. You stood on the sidewalk to wait for a table. And we were talking about SEC football. I went to LSU and Ole Miss. And he was talking about who was going to have a good team and who was going to have a good season and so forth. And the guy in front of us turned around and said to Glenn, said, "Did you go to an SEC team?" Glenn said, "No, I graduated from West Point." He said, "No kidding. When were you there?" Glenn said, "I graduated in 47. He said, "You must have known Doc Blanchard and Glenn Davis." Glenn says, "Yeah, I knew him." That was it. Glenn did not play sports for fun. He was competitive. He was competitive at everything. But he was also a really good loser. When he taught my daughter, who is now 41, when he taught her how to play gin rummy, and she would beat his socks off, he would say, "Jiminy Christmas, you're getting too good." But he was competitive at everything, and he loved to play golf. Now, I consider two kinds of guys in the world, car guys and everybody else. I'm a car guy. I knew all the cars, and I love my 57 Chevy now with a 4-speed, and it'll get rubber in all 4 gears. One year I asked Glenn, I said, "What kind of company car did the LA Times give you?" I mean, it was like a deer caught in the headlights. He said, General Motors, I think. As long as it carried his golf clubs, that was all that mattered. He didn't care what kind of car he drove. I guess it was in the 50s, and I was in high school, and I was a surfer. Lived in Los Angeles, and I surfed up and down the coast. And it was a Christmas vacation, I guess 59. I was 16, 17. And I was in the kitchen fixing breakfast about 5 o'clock in the morning my buddy was going to pick me up, and we were going to surf for about 3 days down in Dana Point. And Glenn came walking in fully dressed. And he said, "What on earth are you doing in here?" I said, "Well, Lee's coming by, and we're going to go surfing for a couple of days." He said, "Don't you know it's going to sleet outside?" I said, "Well, it probably won't sleet at the beach." I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm going to go play golf." In 1999, Glenn invited Rebel and I to the 100th Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. And we got to meet Pete Dawkins. We got to meet Joe Bellino. It was a really big deal, the 100th Army-Navy game. And we were sitting in the stands. We went to the big dance before the game, and the cheerleaders came out, and it was really neat. But we were sitting in the stands, and Glenn was on the aisle. And I guess about halfway through the second quarter, this young West Point cadet came up in his uniform and stood at attention next to Glenn, and Glenn ignored him, watching the game. And he said, "Mr. Davis," and Glenn didn't look at him, and I started getting kind of nervous. And he says, "Mr. Davis, ABC is ready for your TV interview." Glenn says, "Tell him you couldn't find me." He said, "Sir, we have an honor code." He said, "I know you do. Let's go. Lead on." And he left. But the one thing that I remember Glenn saying over and over through the years was how proud, his most proudest moment was graduating from West Point. Above anything else, he was most proud to be a West Point graduate. I had never seen his ring before. He didn't wear jewelry. He was a golfer. He didn't wear rings. Or I just wore a watch when he had to. But a week before he died, he presented my brother with his Rams championship watch, and he gave me his ring. I had never seen it. And it's been in a lockbox in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, since that time, because I'm certainly not going to wear it. And my children and my grandchildren are not going to. It has his name and United States Army engraved on the inside. And it looks brand new. And I want it to stay here at West Point. By the way, I've been contacted by memorabilia auctioneers, but it belongs here. And I want it to stay here as long as Glenn is buried here. So this is time to present this.
Army head coach Jeff Monken for the official presentation for Mr. Slack.
1947 class ring from Glenn W. Davis. To you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Now, in Louisiana, we have something known as lagniappe, and that means something extra. This was an award given to Glenn for it says Glenn W. Davis back, undefeated national football champions, season 44 and 45, Army 23, Navy 7, Army 32, Navy 13. I want y'all to have this too.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
It has an insignia on it. Is that true?
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. Slack, thank you so much. And Rebel, thank you for making the trip here to be with us today. Bob, I'm going to give this to you. We still in tradition give those as awards here at West Point. In fact, we just had our football banquet a couple weeks ago, and several of our players received a very similar award, so that will be something we'll cherish and be precious to the Academy for years to come. And we just thank you so much on behalf of West Point, this tradition-rich football program, which Glenn is a huge part of. Without him, without coaches like Red Blake and Doc Blanchard and players that made up those teams that won the national championships that we so proudly display in our stadium and here in the Hall of Fame, we wouldn't have the history and tradition that we enjoy today. And just to have this ring and to have the award and to have you here and to be able to honor Glenn Davis, perhaps the greatest player ever to play here, and one of the great players of all time in college football history, is just tremendous for us to be a part of this with you today. We thank you. We're humbled by your gift. Certainly that's something that I know your family would love to have and cherish for years, but I join you in agreement that I think it belongs here, and I'm sure that Glenn would be proud to know that it's going to be displayed here for decades to come. So thank you so much. Thanks for everybody for being here today. Let's beat Navy.
And at home for Glenn Davis's West Point class ring right here at the Kenna Hall of Army Sports. Thank you so much again, Mr. and Mrs. Slack, for coming out and your generous donation here to West Point and Army football. Thanks everyone for coming out. Have a great rest of your day.